Welcome back to another writer's review, where today I'm taking a look at Heaven's River, the highly anticipated Bobiverse Book 4, written by Dennis E. Taylor. So, let's jump right in. In terms of basic information, Heaven's River, formerly also known as The Search for Bender, Books 1 and 2, is the fourth and most recent addition to the Bobiverse science fiction series. As I'm filming this video, not a week has passed since the release of the audiobook edition of Heaven's River, with the ebook and paperback releases slated for January of 2021. Now, if you haven't read any of the previous books, I highly suggest that you check out my first video in the series, linked up in the top right and in the description down below. If, however, you are a veteran of the Bobiverse books, you'll find yourself quite familiar with the general feel and structure of this latest installment. For one, Dennis E. Taylor again makes use of several point-of-view characters throughout the length of this novel, again with each of these being assigned a specific narrative theme. The prose is also consistent with the previous installments in the series, consisting entirely of a first-person past-tense narration style. The only real change in terms of structure compared to the volumes thus far in the series is this novel's length, which is effectively double any of the previous books. Now let's take a look at what you can expect from the story itself, without going into spoilers of course. Genre-wise, Heaven's River still falls in the adventure science fiction category, although this installment brings a sort of spy thriller twist to the Bobiverse formula. Many beloved characters from the series make a reappearance in Heaven's River, most notable of which are Bob 1, Bill, Garfield, Riker, Howard, and Bridget, but it goes without saying that other already established Bobs are present as well, just in a smaller role. Naturally, you'll also meet several new Bobs throughout the novel, as well as a couple non-Bob characters, which are all a welcome addition. As was hinted at in the blurb, Bob 1 retakes the spotlight in Heaven's River, with practically 60% of the novel's length dedicated to his point of view. One thing that did catch me a bit off guard about this book was its general thematic direction. It was known well in advance that the novel would be centered around the search for Bender, so I kind of assumed that the book would have a space exploration focus. But in the end, we got a book which is more similar in tone and theme to Bob 1's Delton subplot from the previous books. Not that I'm complaining, since that was my favorite part of the Bobiverse thus far. Next, let's take a look at the subgenre composition of Heaven's River, where you won't be surprised to find many similarities to its predecessors. In my mind, especially to the first book in the series, especially when it comes to action, drama, and historical elements. The drama-oriented sections of the novel are dedicated to the socio-political interactions between the Bobs and the spacefaring species in their domain, so namely humans and the Path, while also focusing on the social changes within the Bobiverse itself, which will have a more important role as the series goes on. In terms of action, Dennis E. Taylor sticks to the same formula which has worked thus far in the series, focusing on all types of action from land, sea, space, and cyberspace, but you should expect that within this book the ratio of these will be skewed towards the land and naval portions of combat. Now, due to the previously mentioned Delton-esque subplot in the novel, Heaven's River has a significant historical element to it. Now, as with the previous books, this mostly deals with the technological, cultural, and socio-political development of pre-spacefaring species, but I can't go into much more detail without going into spoilers. As far as other less prominent subgenres are concerned, you will find a bit of comedy, as you will with all the Bobiverse books, so I won't go much more into that. There's also a bit of romance involved, but that's just mostly due to the fact that Howard and Bridget are present in the novel's story. Then you've got philosophical elements, which are a bit more pronounced than they were with the previous two installments in the series. These mostly deal with the questions around replicant drift, which has been hinted at through the past few books, as well as answering some really important questions about replicants themselves, which have been open to interpretation since book 1 in the series. You'll also find quite a bit of world building in the novel, which unsurprisingly is connected to the Delton-esque subplot, as well as surprisingly, you'll have fantasy elements, since a couple of chapters of the book go well into the fantasy genre. This really isn't representative of the book itself in general, and you'll get what I mean once you get to these segments yourself. In terms of other notable quirks I think you should be aware of, Heaven's River no longer makes use of pre-chapter quotes to set the tone of an upcoming chapter, so in a couple of places I had a bit more trouble keeping track of which Bob I was following. As well, in a couple of Riker's chapters, I had the feeling that Dennis E. Taylor accidentally switched point of view from Riker to the Bob he was talking to mid-conversation, although I didn't go double check, so that might have been just me getting confused mid-read. Next, the novel's main storyline begins literally 10 minutes into the book, which was very surprising and refreshing to see. In my experience, sequels usually spend the first 10% of their length either recapping the story thus far or setting up plot points for later down the road, but that totally isn't the case with Heaven's River, which in my mind gets a huge thumbs up to Dennis E. Taylor. To no one's surprise, the novel continues with its pop culture references, in some sense even leaning further into that direction. The only main difference is that the book references some more recent books of popular fiction, the most notable of which is a series which features a certain foul-mouthed shiny beer can, and if I've managed to film and upload that video by now, I will have that linked in the top right corner of the screen. So in conclusion, as of me recording this video, you can only get Heaven's River in audiobook format on Audible, while the ebook and paperback versions are slated for release on January 24th, 2021. Now, since this is my 5th video in the Bobiverse series, it goes without saying that I am a huge fan of Dennis E. Taylor's work, and Heaven's River is no exception, even if I put my Bobiverse fandom aside for a second. The novel's story hits the ground running, with the actual search for Bender beginning not 10 minutes into the book, or how many pages that translates into. The style of storytelling is consistent with the previous installments in the series, so from the moment you hit play, you are totally immersed in the story, although the novel also introduces a few new ideas, which keeps the experience feeling new and fresh. During my read-through, the plot felt well thought out, leveraging plot points from the previous books, as well as a couple new ones from this book, and by the end of the novel, I felt satisfied with how the various subplots concluded. Not to mention that the novel leaves quite a few hanging threads, so I'm 99% sure that we'll be getting more Bobiverse books in the future, and I got some serious Reaper vibes from Mass Effect from some of the later on hints. Now, as usual, my words might not be enough for you, so I'll have the usual ratings up on screen now. Just bear in mind these were taken about a week after the release of the book, so the number of people rating might be quite low. Heaven's River clocks in at about 17 hours for the audiobook version, or about 200,000 words for the paperback or ebook versions, which is about double the length of your typical novel, which kinda makes sense since Heaven's River is effectively 2 books combined into one. As of right now, you can only get the book in audiobook format, and that'll set you back either $40 outright or an Audible credit, and of course when the ebook and paperback versions release in January, they will be well below that $40 mark. As usual, I'll leave an Amazon link in the description below so you can check for current pricing, and if you're too impatient to wait until the January release of the ebook or paperback version and you haven't given audiobooks a try yet, I suggest that you make use of the Audible trial account and pick up Heaven's River for free. Worst case scenario, you don't like it and lose nothing, and best case scenario, you find a new way to enjoy books, just like I did about 5 years ago. But that's just a suggestion, the choice is up to you. Up next is the lessons portion of this video, so spoiler warning ahead. But before I get into that, I'd first like to take a moment and thank everyone who has watched one of my videos, liked, commented, or subscribed in the past week or so. It's been a huge thrill watching the uptick in traffic on my theories video for Heaven's River, and such a joy to interact with you all in the comments. It's really humbling to know that there's an actual person behind every one of those likes and comments, and I just want you to know that your excitement for the videos I produce and your encouragements do not go unnoticed, and that they do make a really big difference. So thank you. Now enough with my ramblings and on to the lessons portion of the video. Because of the short turnaround time on this video, I wasn't able to have a deep dive into the novel. That'll take a bunch more read-throughs before I can really absorb everything this book has to offer, and if it comes to it, I'll make some separate writing videos later down the line. But for this video, I'd like to talk about the almost non-existent delay between the start of Heaven's River and the start of its main plotline, and how that ties into the general feel of the Bobiverse series. So I'll start off with a question. When thinking about the Bobiverse series as a whole, how do you see it? Do you see it as 4 individual and separate storylines which just happen to come together to create a larger whole? Or do you see it as a continuous narrative which just happens to be split up into 4 physical books? In my mind, the Bobiverse books fall more into this latter category, because despite having gone through the entire series multiple times now, I find it really hard to pinpoint the narrative breaks between book 1 and book 2, or book 2 and book 3, off the top of my head. The transition from all these worlds to Heaven's River is a bit easier to pinpoint, since the Other's defeat serves as a really convenient marker, but even still, if I compare my experience with the Gentleman Bastard series, for instance, there I can clearly differentiate which events happened in book 1 and book 2, even though I haven't reread that series nearly as many times as I did the Bobiverse series. Well, the best explanation I was able to come up with deals with the differences in how the 2 authors deal with foreshadowing regarding main future plotlines, as well as when and how they choose to end them. With Scott Lynch's series, I found that each of the books is structured sort of separate from the others, so a given plotline, its preceding foreshadowing, and the conclusion are all located within a single volume of the series. Since you probably haven't read any of the Gentleman Bastards books, it's kind of pointless for me to give exact examples, but I think you can imagine what I'm talking about, or find parallels to this example in other books you've read. Now, if we look at the Bobiverse series, on the other hand, here that almost never happens. The Others plot, for example, was foreshadowed at the end of book 1, was expanded on in book 2 and 3, and then finally concluded at the end of book 3. Bender's plot was foreshadowed all the way back in book 2, was mentioned several more times in book 3, and then was expanded on and concluded in book 4. And I could go on giving you many more examples. And I think it's this exact difference which makes the Bobiverse series such a flowing experience, where you just kind of coast from book to book, while other series, such as the Gentleman Bastard series in this example, can somewhat feel like a bumpy read, where you first start to accelerate from 0, then finally reach some speed, and then start slowing down to a dead stop again, and then you repeat this process with every single book in the series. Now, this isn't to say that either approach is superior or inferior to the other. It just means that when tackling series, we have 2 different approaches, and we can choose depending on what effect we want to achieve. That brings us to the end of this episode of the Writer's Review. Thank you if you stuck around this long. Consider liking the video if you enjoyed it, leaving a comment, or even subscribing to the channel for more videos such as this. And I hope you have a pleasant week, and I'll see you on the next video.